Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to review the latest episode of Star Wars Andor called Aldani. As it begins, Cassini is beguiled by hyperspeed, it seems. He's on the buyer's ship and the buyer jumps to hyperspeed and he says something like, wow, what the heck is powering this? I've never seen a ship do that. So that was interesting. He'd never seen hyperspeed before, it seems. In the very next moment, the buyer continues to try to persuade Cassini to join the resistance. But Cassini sort of indicates that he thinks the cause is useless because, the empire is so big and you can't win. And, why even try? But the buyer explains how Cassini, who is now clean shaven as seen in Rogue One, is fighting the empire in piecemeal fashion anyway, hitting them with little bee stings here and there. And that he's better off swinging wider if he's swinging anyway, at them, and explains how he wants Cassini's help stealing a large Imperial payroll. On Coruscant, a number of Imperials meet to discuss their mission, which the head guy says is healthcare, finding disease and treating it, meaning finding resistant people and dealing with them, which is a chilling sort of take on what they're doing. And one wonders if he really believes it's healthcare or if he uses that euphemism knowing that it's bullshit. Because the difference is in one case he's crazy and in the other case he's just twisted. Two different things, neither of them good, but there is a difference. Anyway, the buyer lands his ship on a planet which I guess is Aldani. And he gives Cassini, who is now going by Clem, a kyber crystal, which is interesting, as a deposit on what he's going to make, helping to steal the payroll. But the buyer says he wants it back if he survives the mission, in place of, paying him the money. And while the buyer is at a little meeting outside the ship, Cassini considers stealing it, but doesn't. The ship, that is. The buyer's contact is dismayed that the buyer wants to insert Cassini into the mission 3 days from the date of the planned theft, 5 months into the planning of it. And so they have a little discussion about, yes, you need to do this. Well, how can I do this? It's going to, rattle the rest of the crew because it's an unplanned change. And you never really want that if you're planning a heist. You kind of don't want like unknown elements introduced at the last minute, but she goes along with it. Mr. B in his bonnet from last week, his number one and his own boss get a dressing down from their superior at the Empire. And they get a punishment, actually, also for the events surrounding Cassini that happened on Ferrix. And they're told that their regiment is being removed from the oversight of the area and that the Empire is going to take over. Cassini and the buyer's contact, his name is Vel, narrowly avoid detection by a pair of TIE fighters on their walk to their mountainside camp or base of operation. The buyer, meanwhile, goes to Coruscant, where I guess he lives, and dons a disguise, or a different look anyway. Puts on like a wig and changes his clothes and just looks completely different. We next see that there's an Imperial lady officer who learns about the box from last week being found on Ferrix, where it was left when Cassini and the buyer had to make a mad dash out of there. And she wants the information on the incident that took place there from another department, but she's denied her request. Mr. B in his bonnet, who is quite downcast now and quite sullen, returns home, and his mother's delighted to see him. The buyer, sporting a much different personality and demeanor on top of the disguise or different look from before, meets with Senator Mon Mothma at a gallery he owns or runs. And after showing her a few items, and while his assistant distracts her driver, he escorts her into a back room under the pretext of showing her something special, but instead has a conversation with her about a delay in her covert funding of his anti-imperial operations, which apparently she is in support of, not surprisingly. This was a cool scene because, like I said, he's taking on a completely different personality. Which is his real personality, we don't know. I'm assuming the one we saw in the premiere episodes is his real personality, and that this is just an affect that he lives under so that he can carry on his business without being suspected, that because it's completely different. And he switches it off like that when he goes in the back room with her and just goes back into that mode or personality we saw during the premiere. So that was pretty cool. Back at the rebel encampment, an Imperial guard named Gorn, interestingly, who is in on the mission, arrives at the camp, and he's dismayed at Clem's presence, but ultimately accepts his involvement. The senator, meanwhile, returns home to find she'd forgotten that she and her apparent husband have company coming for dinner, and she's not happy about it, causing them to argue. So there seems to be a bit of bitterness between the two of them, because it's more than just this one argument. You can tell from their conversation that like their rapport is not great generally. And it seems from this conversation that he knows that she's a resistor. He may not know exactly what she's up to, but he seems to know that she's not completely down with the Empire, as it were. So we'll have to see more about that as the episodes go on. How much does he know? Is he in on it too? We'll have to find out. And I hope we get to actually see the dinner, because the way she talks about it, it would have been it would be a tense situation, because there are people coming that she doesn't get along with in the Senate, and that I think she totally dislikes, presumably because they're absolute loyalists to the Empire. So I hope we actually get to see the dinner. That'd be cool to see them sort of play cloak and dagger with each other, assuming that these people kind of suspect that she's not totally with them. If they don't suspect her as someone actively fermenting resistance, they probably, if they work with her, probably sense that she's not always on board with everything the Empire wants to do, that the Imperial Senate wants to do, just because that's the way politics works. So the dinner, I think, would be very tense, and I think it would make a good scene for TV. So I hope we get to see that. Back at the resistance camp, Vel details the plan to her group, the plan for the theft of the payroll, and Clem surmises it's a suicide run, which the group confirms is pretty much the case. It turns out that part of the plan involves using an upcoming celestial event as cover for their escape from the facility that they're going to rob. And by celestial event, I mean a kind of natural phenomena, that kind of would resemble a giant fireworks show that they're going to use as cover while they're escaping. So that'll be cool. I hope that's something we actually see. I think we will. Meanwhile, the Imperial lady explains to her superior, the guy from before who was talking about healthcare, that she's been seeing a pattern of activity coming across her desk in various incident reports that indicates to her that a rebellion is organizing, but he doesn't want to hear it. And he gives her a dressing down for, in his estimation, overreaching her station about something that he deems to be nothing. After nightfall, the resistance team shares a meal around a fire as Clem is given a device with further mission details on it and common native phrases as well, all of which he's expected to learn by morning. And that's where the episode ends. I thought this was an excellent episode. I didn't want it to end, just like I didn't want any of the previous 3 episodes to end. I think it amounts to great storytelling. The pacing is excellent. It's really building the tension, and it's giving the legacy character Mon Mothma more backstory, which I think is excellent. I think the sets and costumes, including the all-white Imperial costumes and environs, as well as the mountainous location of the rebel group, all help set an overall tone while highlighting the different levels of life in and under the Empire. And we've seen Coruscant before, so that's not anything new. But the first 3 episodes took place largely in that one, like, steel mill town, as it were. And the only other locations in the episodes were these interiors of the corporate security place. And so now we're seeing a mountainous region, and we're seeing like the full-on Empire headquarters, and everything's white and crisp, and it's even more stark of an image, I think, than the Imperial scenes we've seen before, where they're wearing the gray or black uniforms and everything's dark and black. I think that sets a tone, but I think this sets a different tone of just a crispness that sort of says, to me anyway, harshness, strictness, emotionlessness, which I don't think you get from the depictions of the Empire we've seen before. I think the depictions of the Empire we've seen before, the grays and the blacks, sort of sets a tone of like hopelessness or just despair or sadness, even, which is fine. But this is just a slightly different thing because I think the tone they're trying to set overall for the show is a sense of abject determination to further the cause of the Empire and to maintain the Empire. And I somehow feel like the white is just so stark that it conveys that tone better than black or gray would have. I don't know. That's just a perception that I get, and I think it's really great. I like it. And then we get to see the mountain region, which is also under the Empire, as was Phoenix or Ferrix. And we hear a lot about how the indigenous people there were moved around by the Empire. I didn't go into that in my breakdown, but there's conversation about that. They were forced into another kind of mill town by the Empire, and it just paints a picture of what life is really like under the Empire, even on the farther out planets. I also love how the series is giving us such a granular look at how the rebellion started. Because, by the time of A New Hope, which was the first Star Wars thing that anyone my age ever saw as kids, the rebellion is already established, as is the Empire. And it works, as it is in that film without the backstory, because the basic story is bad guy group versus good guy group. And you just accept that both groups exist and have existed prior to the beginning of the film. But where the prequel films and the Clone Wars animated show explored and depicted the beginnings of the Empire, Rogue One, and then I guess Rebels, which I didn't actually watch, explored some of the backstory of the early days of the organization that came to be known as the Rebellion, or that at the time was known as the Rebellion, depending on what series you're talking about. And this show is getting really into the nitty gritty of it, the formation of the Rebellion that is coming together from sort of disparate, not highly connected resistance groups. And I think that's awesome. One question I have, as much as I like Mr. Luna, who's playing Cassini Andor, is did they try to get Felicity Jones, whom I'd much rather spend an hour looking at every week for this series, obviously with an eye on calling it something different, and weren't able to get her, or if they ever even thought to go in that direction? I'm just curious. She's a bigger name, so she might not have been available. She might not have wanted to do a series because of the time commitment, but I think she would have been a better character to focus on, just because, I don't know, she was kind of the big deal in Rogue One, if I remember correctly. So it was kind of weird that they're focusing on Cassini, but it works really well. So I'm loving the series. I just wondered, did they try to get Felicity Jones and couldn't get her, or did they never think about even going that way? It's probably for the best that they went the way they did, for whatever reason, given the fact that the woke crowd would have shit on yet another female-led show if they'd gone with Felicity Jones. I guess now they're gonna have to settle for bitching about the characterization of the female Imperial lady or the rebel group leader. Because they're gonna, oh, that's a woman in power and she's got to be smarter than the guys, and they're gonna say that about both characters, no matter what happens. So just we need to just prepare for that. Anyway, great episode. I think the series is great. The first 3 episodes were great, and this, they aired all at once, and now there's been a week in between, and we get a new episode, and it's just as good. So I'm really psyched. The sad thing is we're just about halfway through the season already. It's only the second week. But anyway, I look forward to the rest of the season, and I'll be back, of course, to review those episodes once they drop. Before I go, I want to remind you that I have a Teespring store. You can get channel merch there, t-shirts with the channel logo and other designs on them. I'm working on a hat, so hopefully you'll be able to get a hat soon. And if you buy some stuff there, it supports the channel, which I totally appreciate. The link to the store, of course, is in the description. But I'm going to get out of here. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.